Hello everyone, it's been a while since the last video. There were videos recorded of me doing the topology on the face and hands of this character, but unfortunately those video files got misplaced and the folders got deleted. But there is a silver lining. The original videos were recorded using ZBrush 4R4 because 4R5 wasn't working with my computer and tablet arrangement. But since then I have upgraded to 4R6, which means that we now have access to the brand new ZRemesher, and that's a huge deal, and it's going to revolutionize the way that we retopologize things. So a lot of the videos that I recorded probably aren't really that necessary anymore, just as long as you have a basic understanding of the workflow for retopology with a Z-sphere. And as long as you know how to do that for emergencies and for fiddly little things, you have a lot less work to do now because we have ZRemesher. So first I'm just going to recap kind of what I did in 4R4 and how the topology is edited there. And you can see that I've got most of my mesh hidden, most of my retopology lines hidden. I'll just frame up. And what we'll focus on is just the head and shoulders of the character. And if we go back to our main mesh, we can hide that as well. So that way we're not really sort of juggling that much memory. Now you can see here we've got a strip of polygons coming from where we left off. This is the face that was deleted out from our character because the topology wasn't that great, and this is the latest sort of file that survived from the videos that I recorded before. So I'm just going to zoom in, and just to make sure that we zoom in on this area, I'm going to control click on a point so that we can now focus on this area here. So I'm actually going to control click here to select this point, to make this my last point, and draw on from here. So just as long as you get into the habit of doing this, you'll find that it is quite a natural workflow. You can see that we can construct geometry very quickly like that. So you can see that I have created this sort of edge loop around the eye, created these eyelids, and I've also, if we hide that mesh, you can see that we have an indentation between the eyelids where the eyeball is going to be sitting, almost like a wedge cut into it there. And if I hit the A key, we can see that previewed. And so you can see how that is. Now, if you want to actually introduce mesh that either lifts off from or digs into the surface that we are retopologizing, it's simple to do. All we need to do is use the move function instead of draw function, and we can drag that out. Now you'll notice that if we still have our model visible, it may look like this is going into the model. It's actually going along the surface there. So just putting that back. Just remember that you can hide your surface. As long as you have an appended Z-sphere, you can hide whatever surface that you are drawing it to, and then you can actually come in here and change your mesh in this way. And you can see that now we hit the A key, we are now actually drastically changing the flow of this mesh and bringing that back. You can see the mesh is actually diving right down into the mesh like that. And of course you can go out from the mesh as well. In order to sort of create basically any topology that you want. You are not limited with what you have here in this model or this mesh. So I'm just going to frame up on this. I'll show the rest of that. And I'm just going to switch off the editing of that topology. I'm going to come back to my main mesh and unhide that area. Now, what we can do, now that we have ZBrush or ZBrush 4R6, and that's 4R6P2, make sure that you've patched up to the second patch, which fixes a few problems, and that might be why my tablet is working now. You can use the new functionality of the ZRemesher. And so this is just the basic sort of design for our character, and I'm going to just duplicate this out. Just ignore the plane passing overhead if you can hear that. So duplicate that out. So now we've got this one, the 04. And let's see what it does just straight out of the box. Alright, so make sure that we hide the subtool that we copied from. This is what it looks like now, and I'm just going to hit Shift F in order to turn on polyframe. And you can see that we've got quite nice edge flow here. In fact, I'd say that the flow is greatly superior to what we had in ZRemesher. You will notice that we've got the polygon density quite high. It's currently set to, I think, 15, which equals 15,000 target polygons. And if we look at the active points, you can see that it is a little bit off from that, but the reason for that is that we have adaptive density on, and this is on by default. Adaptive density takes the analysis stage and it allocates more polygons where it believes that it needs them. So you can see that the size of the polygon here compared to the size of the polygon here is quite different. That's because it has decided that in order to keep the flow working well and also to describe this detail, it needs more polygons here than it does over the chest area. If we were to undo the ZRemesh and then turn off adaptive and try again, okay, you can see that well, the actual polygon size is similar to what it was before, but there is a difference in the facial construction. But the main sort of difference with the adaptive switched off is that now we are much closer to that target number of 15,000 polygons. So what I'm going to do is take this polygon count down to something like, we'll say 5. And we will undo that. and whoop, actually I'll hit escape to cancel that, and I will turn adaptive back on, and now remesh. Okay, so that's what it looks like when we have a target polygon count of 5. And you can see that again we're out by about 5,000–6,000 polygons. And that's because the adaptive is trying to define as much of the outline of our character as possible. And you can see that that's actually pretty good for a game character. The thing that I would want to mainly sort of fix up is the eye area, but most of the rest of it is looking pretty good. And you can see here these fingers aren't too bad. There's some sort of shearing here, but we can sort of fix that up either in Maya or using some topological move. But you can see that it's defined the shape a lot better, and there's a lot less of a collapse around things like the claws than we got in ZRemesher. And also a major sort of improvement is on these little horn protrusions. You can see that these really are close to the original shape, and it looks really good. So that's actually a pretty good base mesh for our character. So that I'm just going to keep, and I'm going to so back to this and hide this. Now that's with using almost the exact sort of settings that ZRemesher comes with. The only thing that we changed was the polygon count. Adaptive is on by default, so all we did was bring the polygon count down to something like 5, and you can see what we came up with. But if you want to exercise more control, I've got another duplication of the mesh here, and you can see that this spiffy character, painted with very patriotic colors, if you're American, or French, or English, or Australian, dressed up in red, white and blue, and I'll explain that in a sec. But you can also see that we have curves drawn on the surface here, and this is exactly the same principle as we had in ZRemesher. We have the eye, a circle around the eye, in order to try and get the computer to recognize an edge loop there, and we've defined flow around the character's mouth. We've got this cowl, or sort of the cloak curve. I've also defined a line along the horn and around the horn. And let me tell you, doing these circular edge loops is a lot better in ZRemesher. I'm not sure if they've changed it or if it's just that I've gotten really lucky with it, but doing those edge loops around, and that's the if I go back to draw, the actual tool that you need, or brush that you need, is the ZRemesher guides brush, and it's saying that you should switch it to dynamic draw size. This means that when it's in dynamic, it basically keeps that same sort of spacing of the points. So I'm just going to click OK, and you can see that it's tiny. I'm going to bring the draw size up to something like 264, and you can see that's a lot smaller than your regular 264, but that's how it is. But drawing a guide, you can just click, drag, hold shift, and now you can see that there's a lot more sort of, I'm just saving the file, it's really sort of going around that limb in the most logical way possible. Like I would have had to have done that like a couple of times and probably rotated it so that the camera was facing the length of that joint. And so yeah, I think that they must have tweaked it slightly to make that work better. Now, what's with the color scheme? This is either the worst 4th of July outfit or Captain America cosplay or some sort of bad superhero. But this is actually because there is another function in ZRemesher that we didn't have in QRemesher. We sort of did in that you could mask areas that you wanted to increase the density of. In ZRemesher you use polypaint instead, and you can see that I've clicked this use polypaint button in order to activate it. Now if I hit the control key while I'm hovering over this, you can read the description of it. Now this description I think is misleading, because that third paragraph says pure blue specifies a higher polygon density within the painted area, pure red means a lower polygon density within the painted area, and white gives ZRemesher total control over polygon density. Now reading that, I would have thought that if you paint something blue, you get more polygons. If you paint something red, you get less polygons. And so that's how I painted up my initial model, and it didn't work. It was the exact opposite. So I've actually taken this and I've painted blue in the areas that I don't want as many polygons, particularly this thigh area. You can see this is a very deep blue. And the areas where I want more polygons, such as around this eye or around the mouth, I've painted a bright red. And areas where I'm not too worried, I want more polygons, but not quite the sort of heavy density that I want around an eye, I've painted sort of with a light red and light blue in areas where I don't want to reduce it too much. So I've drawn curves, I've poly painted the red and the blue to indicate where I want more and less geometry, and I have use polypaint selected. That's basically the only things that I've changed. Color density I think might be set to 4 by default. I found that this has very little bearing on what actually happens here. And I can test that out later on. But apart from that, it's more or less all still the same. So let's have a look at what we get when we ZRemesh with these guides. Okay, so this is the result. So again, Shift F to turn on polyframe. And the first thing you should notice is the density of polygons around the face here. We've got an incredible amount of polygons here, and if you remember, we had a little bit of a blue tinge on this bicep, and you'll notice that the bicep has got these larger sort of spaced polygons here, whereas we have kept the larger number of polygons around the shoulder, around the elbow, and around the neck. If we check down, we can have a look at the fingers, and you can see that the fingers have got very dense sort of polygons, and that's because we had that drawn in quite red. I'll turn perspective on. And you remember that very thick, strong blue that we had on the thighs? Well, you can see that the polygon density on the thighs is a lot less than the rest of the model. So framing it up and just zooming in a little bit, you can see that the flow, that cowl line, the hood, the cloak line has come through nicely. If we look at the face, you can see that the line that I defined to basically guide the mouth around and down, that's come in very well, and also the edge loop around the eye is very strong. And again, it has followed those horns very nicely. Now, our other remeshed character with it being low poly, I'll just switch to this guy, and you can see we didn't have a loop drawn around this eye. This is much lower polygons, of course, but we didn't have a loop drawn around this eye, and you can see that this eye has basically just got loops coming down this way, coming along this way, and there isn't a circular loop around this eye, which means that this guy has got a lot more control. We've exercised a lot more control over the way that this character has been drawn. Now, one problem that we have is the polygon count, because this is going to be a game character. And what we specified, you remember with the previous non-guides, non-painted model, we had an extra 5,000 or 6,000 polygons. Well, we were going to set this polygon count to 4, hopefully 4,000 polygons. How did we go? 26,000 polygons. So basically, that has really only given us a suggestion of how much density we're going for in a rough ballpark. If this was up higher, this would be even higher. It would be higher than the 26K. So just be aware of that this target polygon count, once you have adaptive switched on, you're using polypaint, you're using guides, this is really only a sort of a broad description of how much you want to sort of focus on polygon count. And if we bring this right down, it will reduce it, but it won't reduce it to the level that we have here. Now, if I wanted to change one thing about this, it's that this eye, I'd like to be able to have a sort of an eyelid here. And what we could do is we could sort of take this sort of central sort of area here and punch that in, sort of extrude the eye in there, make an extrusion in so that it has a top eyelid and a bottom eyelid. But what I'd like is to maybe have more of a line across here, make it more of an easy task in order to be able to select polygons which are going to eventually turn into an eyelid. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do, keeping my settings exactly as they are, I'm just going to undo, so we're back to the Dynamesh, with the ZRemesher guides selected, and I might take this draw size down a bit. I'm just going to draw across the eye like that. So that's the sort of eyelid that I want to define. I want polygons flowing this way so that we can have a top and bottom selected. And now I'm just going to hit ZRemesher. Okay, so now we have that done, and you can see that we have the loop still, but now we've got this line going all the way through those circles. The circles are defined a little bit more sort of rectangular, but that's to be expected because we have a line going this way. We've got a line going this way. We also have to have a line going down that way in order to have square polygons, which means that we are sort of squaring out this area here. But there is still sort of this edge loop going around this eye that we can use. But now we can come in here and we can actually select a row or a strip of these polygons and extrude that in and turn that into an eyelid, and then sort of come in here and define this better. Now, the polygon count, the main sort of offender that causes these high polygon counts, and we'll just check, yep, it's still around 26,000. The main sort of problem is the poly painting that we've put on this surface. So there is a way that we can fix that, a way that we can reduce that. I'm just going to go back to our painted model, and I'm going to make sure that we've got a white color selected. And I'm also going to go back to the standard brush. I'm going to switch off Z-Add. I'm going to have RGB on, and I'm going to take my RGB intensity, which is usually probably 100%, and I'm going to bring it down to 30. And then I'm going to go to color, and again make sure that that white is selected. I'm going to fill object, and I'll do that again. So now you can see that we have very pale colors. We have this sort of, the strongest color is really this blue here, and this is probably about as blue as we had here in the chest before. And particularly the facial area, there's a lot less of the red there, the strong red, and the fingers as well. So all we did was fill this twice with an RGB value of 30 and pure white, and let's see how that affects the polygon count. Okay, so now if we come in and have a look at the polygon flow, we can already see that there are less polygons here. This was almost shaded with the amount of polygons that we had. Now there are less, but you can still see that there is more definition in this face than there is in this chest area here. There's still sort of enough geometry on these shoulders in order to be able to bend and be animated, and the same with these elbows. And we've still got a reduction here of the bicep, and if we come down to the thigh, you can see that there's still a reduction there. And it's not as strong a reduction, but there is still sort of reduction there. And we can come in like we did in Maya and do our edge loop removal in any area that we think that we can get away with it, like perhaps in this forearm, these thighs, this area here. But you can see that our overall polygon amount has been reduced. So how many polygons have we got? We've lost 10,000. We've managed to get rid of 10,000 of those polygons just by lessening the amount of the polypaint influence on our character. And you can see that we have quite a nice starting mesh for a game character. 16,000 isn't too high, and we won't be introducing that much more when we have an eyelid or if we bring in a mouth. This is a good starting mesh for sculpting body details, and so yeah, I'm quite happy with that. And you can see these horns are pretty close to perfect, which is something that ZRemesher just could not handle. And these fingers, we can tweak these slightly. We can probably maybe even bring these into Maya and change the way that the spacing goes between those, or we can use a relax function and under the deformations tab in order to get these hands to fit better with the underlying geometry that we had sculpted. But overall, that's looking pretty good. So you can see that all of the stuff that we were doing in ZRemesher and all of those videos that I ended up losing, we can get away with doing a lot less work now that we have ZRemesher. I'm really impressed with that. I think they've done a great job. So yeah, thanks for watching. In the next lesson I'll be going over things like maybe reducing down this polygon count with the delete edge loops function, and a couple of other things. So I'll see you then.